A year ago, I started just reading through the New Testament and writing down. As soon as I came to a specific verse or passage, I just wrote down what I think, this would be a good sermon title for that. And so I made it quite a ways through the New Testament with just all kinds of different sermon ideas. Carol asked me, where do you come up with sermon titles? Where do you come up with ideas for sermons? And she said, well, do you just pray and say, God, what do I need to do this week? And while we do that, I think there's a lot more to it as well. We do ask God for guidance and direction, but I think we have to be aware of our surroundings as well. Well, what is it that we are struggling with that we need to approach or talk about? The Bible isn't like a magic genie where you just, okay, this is going to be my life verse here, and just live by it. I was talking to Carol, and I did that, and I said, okay, well, this is going to be the verse I'm going to preach on now. And it just happened to be a really good one. I was like, well, that was a bad example. But we can't just use the Bible, just one part of the Bible, to be what we want it to be, but we have to look at the whole Bible. And I understand that today's sermon might step on a few toes, and I'm willing to do that. With that said, why are we looking at the verse that they just read, Carl and Crystal just read, when it talked about people that are harassed and people that are helpless, like sheep without a shepherd? Why are Christian, Christ-confessing people acting like sheep without a shepherd? Why do we have confused Christians? Why do we have Christians that are not bold? Why do we have God-believing, fearing people with no compassion? Do you fit into that category? Because I would say that I probably do. The verses that I wanted you guys to read is in Matthew chapter 9. And you guys did read them. It's just 35 through 38. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Instantly, when I read this passage, there are some things that just pop out. It's like it's automatically highlighted in my Bible. One, that Jesus had compassion on people. That's something that I know I struggle with sometimes. And we'll get into that a little bit. Excuse me. But it doesn't say that Jesus had compassion on only those that believed in him. Anytime you see a large crowd of people in the Bible, anytime that there's someone that's sick, the majority of the time it shows Jesus seeing these people, this large crowd, and then immediately follows with, and he had compassion on them. He saw a need, and he then approached it. We know that not all of the people in these large crowds, these huge crowds that followed, were Christ-believing people. Think about the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the religious leaders of the day. They were amongst these people, and they weren't professing Christ's name. They were out to catch him in any kind of misstep that he might have, any misstep that he might have taken. Yet still, Jesus had compassion on the people. He had compassion on the crowds, knowing that some might just be there for healing. Knowing that some might just be there just because they had nothing better to do and they wanted to see someone that couldn't walk. That would be pretty interesting to see. The second thing that pops out is that the people were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. This phrase, like sheep without a shepherd, it's been stuck in my mind. And to be honest, whenever I went through the New Testament, I just started writing down sermon ideas, sermon titles, and the passages that correlate, and maybe some of them cross-referenced. This wasn't even the title I had in mind, like sheep without a shepherd. It was the compassion of Jesus. And that's where we're really going today. But this phrase has been stuck in my mind. I can't get it out of my mind because I look at the church and I'm like, why are we like sheep without a shepherd? And that's not even who he was talking about. If our lives are no different than those without Christ, then we're doing something wrong. If our church is not an active church in prayer and service and love, then we are no different than the world without Christ. At first glance, we know that we think of literal sheep. I will be the first to tell you I've never had any really interaction with sheep. We just never had that growing up. We never had sheep. I don't know if you do. Maybe you should get up here and teach this lesson, this sermon. But at first glance, we think of the literal sheep. That sheep without a shepherd. Sheep aren't known as the smartest of animals, and correct me if you want to later, not right now. But they're not known as the smartest of animals. They'll go anywhere unless they are led. They're vulnerable to predators, to the elements. In fact, they are vulnerable to themselves. What happens if you don't shear a sheep? It just keeps growing. And it just keeps growing. And eventually, they'll become wool blind. They can't see because it's so, and they'll walk right off a cliff. They can suffocate themselves. They're almost just as much a danger to themselves than outside forces without their shepherd. Thirdly, Jesus confided in, trusted, and empowered his followers. He saw the crowds, he saw their problems, he saw their troubles and their concerns, their things that we, kind of hold around and have baggage. And he went back to his disciples with compassion in his heart. And he said this, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord to send out workers." Jesus had compassion for people. And we're going to go through several scripture, and I try never to overload you with just a lot of scripture. But if you are writing down the scriptures today, if you're taking notes, I want you to write these down as we go through them, because these are some more examples of the compassion that Jesus had and where it's noted here in the Gospels. Matthew 14, chapter 14, verses 13 through 14. "And when Jesus had heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. And hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick." Matthew 15:22 was with a woman was crying out to Jesus, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus healed her daughter. Matthew 20, verses 32 through 34. "And Jesus stopped and called them. 'What do you want me to do for you?' he asked. 'Lord,' they answered, 'we want our sight.' And Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him." Mark 1:41, "A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, 'If you are willing, you can make me clean.' Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.'" Mark 6:34, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things." Mark chapter 8, verse 2, "During those days another large crowd gathered. And since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance.'" Instance after instance, time after time, in the Bible, you see Jesus having compassion on people, and then he looks at the situation and says, "I have the answer." And he solves the problem. And you see it in 3 steps, in 3 stages. Jesus sees a need, Jesus has compassion for the person, and Jesus acts on that compassion. It's not an 8-point process. It's not something that you can get confused with. You see the need, you approach it, you have compassion, and then you act. It's very simple. Now, we may not, and I can't speak for you, but I've never fed 5,000 people with just a little bit. I've never had this large crowd where I can start healing them. I've never had that experience. But have you ever been able to feed a homeless man a hamburger? I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to just see the need, have compassion on that person, and then fulfill their need. Solve the problem for them for that moment anyway. Have you ever been able to shorten up your restaurant budget? Maybe say, okay, we're not going to go one more, or we're going to cut 2 restaurant visits out of this month, and so we can help send a missionary overseas. Or maybe it's just saying, hey, we're going to cut the budget a little bit just so we can tithe. Did you take time to eat lunch with a lady or the man that was depressed at work? Because maybe that lunch, maybe that 30-minute time, or maybe it's even just a 15-minute break that you have with that person that's crying in the corner at work because life at home is so stressed. Their husband or their wife may be leaving them. The kids are crazy. The bills are growing. And they just need somebody. Have you taken that time to have compassion and then act on it? What Jesus did was simple. See the need, be convicted to action or have compassion, and then act. This compassion thing Jesus was good at. He was really good at it. And what's so great is that as soon as Jesus saw the issue, he was moved to action. He didn't think, well, let me go home and think about it just for a little bit, and then I'll come back. Have you ever seen maybe someone at Walmart with a cardboard sign says, hey, we need help? And you drive on later, you think, you know what, I should have helped them. And you go back and they're nowhere to be found. You ever had that? I know I'm not alone in my thinking that when I see someone with a cardboard sign asking for something, that I feel like they have interior motives. They have something else going on. And there was a time that I passed up a family, and I'm not saying this for recognition, but more out of embarrassment or shame that I didn't do something. But I saw a family. It was out at Walmart. They had the back of their van up. It was probably, I think, 6 people in the family. And they said, we have no food. We have nothing. Can you help? And even as I drove by and I saw them, they're right there, right where you stop to get onto Broadway or 50 Highway, and you're like, you wave, you nod, you smile, you wave, whatever it is, and then you drive on, rationalizing, saying, they're probably just playing me. I was struck with so much guilt of not helping that as soon as I got to McDonald's, I took a right and I went through the drive-thru. I bought 12 cheeseburgers. I went back and I gave it to them, and the expression on the kids' faces just lit up. And while I was happy, I was so sad with myself that a Christ-confessing person was so cold to drive by a family in need. How can I come up here and say, hey, impact my community, impact this community, take a step out on faith that God's going to be in control if I can't even help a family in need? I wonder how many times Jesus thought that about us. That he probably didn't think the same way that I think, but I know that he knew there would be people that would not do what he's called them to do. And that's why he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. There's a lot of people in this room, but how many workers are there? He saw the lost and the harassed and the helpless sheep and knew that they needed a shepherd. And the sheep without a shepherd thing was not a new piece of terminology. Even the kings of the past, starting with King David, because what was King David before he was king? He was a shepherd, and so kings from that point on were also known as shepherd kings because they were provided direction and leadership and protection and rule. But as the Israel nation has a past when it comes to shepherding their flock, they weren't very good at it. If you want to go to Ezekiel chapter 34, Ezekiel's filled with all this kind of stuff. It really talks about the shepherds and the sheep. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I do challenge you to read the whole chapter on your own. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 34, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, prophesy prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourself with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. Verse 6, my sheep wandered over all the mountains on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals. And because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than my flock. Therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against the shepherd, and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock, so that shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. This is talking about Jesus coming and saving his flock. And this is before he was born. This was in the Old Testament. Maybe you think these verses are just for the people of this time, and I get it. That would make sense, as Jesus did come to save his flock, and he did save his flock. And just so you know, if you're not a Christian, here's the gospel. Jesus came to this earth, became man, was born. He lived his life, had his ministry. He died on a cross for the forgiveness of your sins because we put him there. And then he raised 3 days later so that we could have an opportunity for an eternity with him, if you choose to follow him. And so Jesus saved his flock by dying on the cross, raising the 3 days later. And maybe you can see this passage that maybe it's only used for ministers or elders and teachers or deacons, and a charge for them to keep an extra eye out for the congregation. And I can see how that makes sense as well. And maybe that's what it's for. But can you see how all of us have a responsibility in being Christ-like for looking after those that are in need? Looking after other Christians? Even looking after those who don't know Christ? The description here is pretty clear. They were harassed, helpless, sheep without a shepherd, not being led. And this Ezekiel passage resonated with the people of Jesus' time as well. The religious leaders, the teachers of the law, they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. That's why they take such offense at Jesus. In Ezekiel 34, 2-3, woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Are we doing that? Are you only taking care of yourself? Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves in the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. They were like sheep without a shepherd. But Jesus was the answer. And it was Jesus who confided in and trusted and empowered his followers. And he went to his disciples, his trusted friends, his top followers, his entourage. And he showed them a problem. He showed them the problem. The harvest is plenty. The people are ready. Look at these crowds. Look at their issues. They need me. I am the answer. He told them that I am the solution to their problem. Me, Jesus, was the answer. His time to die had not yet come. But Jesus was the answer. This is why Jesus was on the earth. And it was the disciples' responsibility to give the gospel to them, just as it is our responsibility to give the gospel and take care of those who don't know Christ and take care of those who do. He let them know that it was on them. The harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. The workers are few. There is work to be done. What's standing in your way? And a lot of times the answer of what's standing in our way is us. I read this and I see that the workers are few, but maybe that was just then. Because I can go probably in a 5-block radius and find a church somewhere. Go anywhere 5 or 6 blocks and you probably find a church. Find another church, find another church. If there are that many churches, then why are the workers few? It can't be. There has to be plenty of workers now. Now that Jesus has come to save his flock, we see church after church in the United States. So how is it that the workers are few now? And I think we just have to look back, oh, this is the United States, and look at the United States as a whole and say, the workers are few. Because of where we are. Look at the numbers. Those that follow Christ, those that claim Christ. The workers are few, but the harvest is still plentiful. Like sheep without a shepherd. Here's our dilemma. Because we fall in the sheep category. We don't like to be called sheep. Because that means that we know sheep aren't the smartest. We know that they can be a danger to themselves. We know that they rely on their shepherd for care, even basic needs like getting sheared. We don't like that we need to have a protector because we can defend for ourselves, right? We don't like that it says that we are harassed and helpless. We don't like that we need help. And we may not say that verbally, and probably all of us would stand up and say, we do need Jesus. We need Jesus. Yes, we do. But then our lives reflect, maybe we don't need Jesus as much as I said in church I did. We may not say that verbally, but our actions, our lives look like that. We don't like being called sheep, but it's not about us. Peter had a really cool interaction with Jesus in John 21, 15 through 19. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This is what it's about. It's not about us. It's about Jesus. It's about taking care of his people. It's about spreading the gospel. Jesus said, "If you love me, then feed my lambs. If you love me, then take care of my sheep." Jesus said, "If you love me, then feed my sheep." And then he follows it up with, "Follow me." And if you're going to say, "Yes, Jesus, I'm going to follow you," then you are going to feed his lambs. And you are going to take care of his sheep. And you're going to feed his sheep. Because you love him and you're going to follow him and do what he's asked you to do. Because it's not about us. It's about him. Jesus' followers should not look like the sheep without a shepherd, because we already have a shepherd that's conquered the enemy, that has empowered us to bring others out of the darkness and into the light as he is in the light. May you choose to say, "Yes, I'll follow you." Maybe it'll be for the first time. Maybe it'll be another time to come back to the shepherd's voice. Maybe you're looking for a place to call home, to be a part of a flock. Now is the time. Today's the day. May you decide to follow Jesus and hear your shepherd's voice.